Good evening, everyone, and welcome to DTSC's statewide quarterly public forum. For those of you who joined us in May, we welcome you back. And for those of you that are joining us for the first time, we are so appreciative that you've taken the time to join us in this collaborative space. We welcome each of you, all of you, to the table. My name is Patrice Bowen, and I serve as Chief and Acting Deputy Director for the Office of Environmental Equity under the leadership of our Chief Deputy Director, Francesca Negri. Our Office of Environmental Equity is dedicated towards supporting 3 programs, including environmental justice, public participation, and tribal affairs. However, tonight in my expanded role, I have the privilege of serving as one of your facilitators. Now, also joining me this evening in this role as my co-facilitator is my colleague, Michelle Banks-Ardern, who serves as a public participation specialist for our Office of Environmental Equity. Michelle, say hello.
Good evening, everyone.
Thank you, Michelle. Now, to get things started, we'd like to begin by sharing the purpose of these quarterly public forums. These forums have been designed specifically for you, our communities, our stakeholders, and tribal governments, providing a dedicated space to share your voices, to share your thoughts, and for us to listen to your experience, concerns, and expectations. Our pledge and commitment to you remains the same. Tonight and throughout these forums, our commitment is to listen to understand and to look for shared avenues and opportunities to incorporate your feedback into solutions that affect change. All in all, allowing us through this shared journey the opportunity to meet our organizational strategic goal of building strong partnerships and to listen and to learn and to grow together. Now let's get started. For this evening's meeting guidelines, we're asking you that by participating in this meeting, that you understand that this meeting is being recorded and you may be muted for background noise. Now, during the question and comment section, we'll focus on answering questions related to tonight's presentations. And as always, we'll do our best to ensure that your questions are answered, but we want to also make sure that everybody has the opportunity to participate. So we ask that you limit your input and your questions to allow for others who may not have had the opportunity to participate yet. Again, we thank you so much for your patience and understanding as we navigate in this collaborative space. Slide 5, please. For tonight's meeting, the meeting materials have been provided and are available at dtsc.ca.gov/public PUBLIC forums, FORUMS. Again, for your convenience, we've posted these numbers in our chat box. Now, for those of you that are calling from the media, please contact Barbara Zumwalt, our office of communications at Barbara, BARA.Zumwalt, ZUMWALT at dtsc.ca.gov. Again, that's Barbara Zumwalt in our Office of Communications at Barbara, BARA, Zumwalt, ZUMWALT at dtsc.ca.gov. Slide 6, please. Our organizational mission serves as our guiding compass. The mission of DTSC is to protect California's people, communities, and environment from toxic substances, to enhance economic vitality by restoring contaminated land, and to compel manufacturers to make safer consumer products. We are fortunate to work with a team of dedicated public servants who are committed to assisting us with fulfilling our organizational mission. Michelle and I would like for you to meet them. Now, to assist us with the introductions, we'd like to introduce our Director of DTSC, Dr. Meredith Williams, who will introduce our executive leadership team and who will also share some opening remarks. Dr. Williams?
Thank you, Patrice, and thank you all for attending this evening. Here we are in month 17 of the global pandemic. And we're working to bring you another virtual set of updates on DTSC's progress over the last quarter. And while Zoom has made it possible for more people to attend these meetings, nothing is quite as impactful as in-person interactions. Yesterday, Cali PA Secretary Blumenfeld and I had the opportunity to listen to and speak with a group of concerned community members. They gathered at our Sacramento headquarters to express continued frustration with the department. It's a very different experience to hear from people in person. We can see the breadth of the emotion that comes from the suffering and the loss that they're experiencing. And there's an understanding that I gained and that we can all gain from those kinds of opportunities to interact in person. Yesterday's group challenged us to break through the patterns of environmental injustice and to take action on a number of fronts. And though it may be difficult for those of you on this call to sense how much impact you have when you engage with us, I want to assure you it strengthens our resolve to keep moving forward. We did yesterday and we'll continue to listen tonight. And while there is a long way to go to fully address decades and centuries of contamination across the state, we are taking steps to protect the most vulnerable. For example, we've just taken new action to regulate the metal shredding industry, most of which operates in communities with the highest pollution burdens and EnviroScreen scores. No other state has proposed the protections that we are proposing. And while we recognize the value that the metal shredding industry plays in a circular economy, we think there has to be a better way for these facilities to operate. And you'll hear more about that today. Recently, Secretary Blumenfeld remarked that it's a tough time to be a human in this world. There are both man-made and natural catastrophes around every corner, and it feels like we're losing the battle against climate change. We are all sharing this experience, and I want to recognize the humanity that exists on this Zoom as each of us go through these difficult times. And we do need each other, and maybe we need you to push us, and maybe you need us to protect you, but there is a need for us to continue to work together towards better environmental outcomes. I take this opportunity to work as a public servant to heart, and I look forward to hearing all of the comments tonight. Before I turn the platform over and the microphone over, I would like to introduce introduce members of the executive team who are with us tonight. Patrice already mentioned our Chief Deputy Director, Francesca Negri. Don Foley's with us. He is the Deputy Director for our Office of Environmental Information Management. Aaron Robertson is here. He's the Director of our Administrative Services. Our Chief Counsel, Larry Hayfitz, is with us. And then we have our three program deputies, Grant Cope, the Deputy Director for Site Mitigation and Remediation, Carl Palmer, the Deputy Director for Safer Consumer Products, and Rizgar Ghazi, the Deputy for Hazardous Waste Management Program. Thank you for your attention. Thank you for joining us tonight and making the time for this. And with that, I will turn it over to Matthew Schapper, who is a Brownfields coordinator here at DTSC, so that he can provide you with the next update. Thank you.
And thank you, Dr. Meredith. Before we do that, we're going to go to my colleague and co-facilitator, Michelle Banks-O'Dern, and Michelle will walk you through the agenda, and then we'll introduce the presenters for this evening. Thank you, Dr. Williams, for your opening remarks. And Michelle, the baton is yours.
Thank you, Patrice. In addition to the welcome that was given this evening and the opening remarks brought by Dr. Williams, this evening's agenda also includes two presentations. The first presentation is on the Equitable Community Revitalization Grant given by Gregory Schaefer, DTSC's Brownfields Coordinator in Region 4 for our site mitigation and restoration program. It will be followed by a question and answer session. And then our second presentation will be on metal shredders by Wayne Lorenzen, TSC's Hazardous Waste Management Program Permitting Division Chief. That presentation will also be followed by a question and answer session prior to our closing. Next slide, please. Before we begin our first presentation, we do want to share with you how you can participate in this evening's meeting. This slide provides an overview of the 3 ways to ask questions during our question and answer session. The first is Zoom audio. To use Zoom audio, use the raise hand feature and you will be invited to unmute your audio when it's your turn. Secondly, phone audio. If you are joining us by telephone this evening, please press *9 to join the phone queue. I will say the last digits of your telephone number when it's your turn. At that time, please press *6 to unmute your line. For those of you who are using the dedicated phone line in Spanish, please notify your interpreter, Brittany, when you have a question or comment. For those who would like to use text only, to have your question read aloud, please use the Q&A feature. We are going to do our best this evening to address all questions and comments. We'll display this information yet again for the question and answer comment portions of the meeting. For those on Spanish audio, the interpreter will ask and she will ask your questions for you. Now I'd like to turn the meeting over to our first presenter this evening, Gregory Schaefer. Gregory?
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Michelle, for the introduction. My name is Gregory Schaefer. I am the Brownfield Coordinator for DTSC's Region 4, which covers Southern and Southeastern California. And I'm going to be talking about the Equitable Community Revitalization Grant, which I am working along with Miriam Tasnif-Abbasi, who you may have heard speak at several public engagement sessions previously. Next slide, please. The Equitable Community Revitalization Grant is part of the Cleaning Up Vulnerable Communities Initiative, which was recently passed, which was one of the governor's initiatives that was recently passed in this budget, which totals $500 million. The Equitable Community Revitalization Grant portion is $276 million that is allocated exclusively for grants that will cover environmental investigations, environmental cleanups, and community-wide investigations. The goal of this money is to support vulnerable communities. And using this fund, the ECRG has been developed to support the safe reuse of properties that are sources of environmental burdens in communities. So when I'm talking about environmental investigations, that means any sort of assessment or sampling that needs to be conducted to understand environmental conditions at a property. Environmental cleanups means after we've identified any sort of environmental issues, any sort of measures that need to be taken to ensure the site is safe for use or reuse. And community-wide investigations are early stage investigations that often a community or a city may conduct when they are trying to target a specific area that they want to bring to reuse, essentially. So this grant would also be eligible to fund those early stage assessments and investigations. The goal is to support reuse in areas with high environmental burdens, and the way that we've defined that in this program are areas with Cal EnviroScreen scores of 75% or higher. And Cal EnviroScreen is a measure of environmental burden that's developed by the Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment, or OEHA. There was a link just provided in the chat that can take you to where you can find some more detailed information on what Cal EnviroScreen is. But essentially, it is a number that is calculated based on pollution burdens and combined with demographic data. DTSC will also be considering applications that are below the 75% threshold, as long as they are supporting vulnerable populations in rural communities or tribes. And last, this will be a competitive application process. Next slide, please. This slide is going over some of the key components of the ECRG. And on the right-hand side, you'll see a map of California. And all of the orange and yellow highlighted areas are census tracts that have CalEnviroScreen scores of 75% or greater. I know this map is a little small and you can't necessarily see all of the areas that are covered here, but we did want to show a statewide view of what that looks like. And other areas, namely metro areas such as the Bay Area, including the East Bay, Los Angeles, San Diego, and the Inland Empires generally have higher concentrations of these 75% and higher scores. In terms of the applicants, the eligible applicants, they will include public entities, which means cities, counties, or municipalities. It will include tribes and nonprofits. Again, the sites that will be eligible include sites that are above 75% for CalEnviroScreen, or if they're outside of the highest 75% CalEnviroScreen scores, they must be planned for reuse to support a vulnerable population. And this was really brought into our program based on feedback we received early on and from public comments saying that rural communities may be left out of this funding, which could really change, which could bring some really great reuse into communities that need it. So this is something that we were able to incorporate based on your feedback. And the schedule that we have right now will be a pre-qualification round in the fall. The pre-qualification round will only include the threshold criteria, and we will be using that to kind of understand the interest in our program and define how best to allocate the funds over the fiscal year. Because this fiscal year, we have $76 million of the $276 million total to be allocated from the grant before June 30th, 2022, that is. The soft launch will start shortly after the pre-qualification round. It will include the full application, and any site that submitted an application during the pre-qualification round will be ranked and scored with all applications during the soft launch in the fall and winter. We're planning to make decisions by early next year, and the next cycle of funding availability, it will be determined, again, likely based off of the information we get from the pre-qualification round. Next slide, please. This slide goes over a little bit more detail for eligibility for the Equitable Community Revitalization Grant. The applicant cannot cause or contribute to any release of hazardous substances at the site. They must meet the requirements for asserting a defense to CERCLA liability. They must have site access, but ownership is not a requirement for this grant. So the way that our grant has been structured is to model it after the US EPA Brownfields grants. And one important distinction between our ECRG grant and the US EPA Brownfields grant is that ownership is not a requirement. And this was incorporated into our program after consultation with stakeholders and with US EPA, saying that the ownership criteria was a large burden and often ended a lot of projects that could have benefited communities. So that is something that we decided not to model our program after. The eligible sites must be planned for redevelopment. There must be a reason to believe the site is contaminated. The site cannot have an active order, and the site cannot be on the national priorities list or proposed for the national priorities list. One other important distinction to make is that tribes that apply for the ECRG do not need to meet the CERCLA liability defense, and neither do non-owners. But in both situations, they must assert that they did not cause or contribute to contamination at the site. Next slide, please. This slide goes over the allowable costs. The grants, if an applicant is awarded a grant, the term will be for 2 years and will cover all costs associated with cleanup, investigation, or the community-wide assessment. These costs, there are just some examples on the screen, but they will include things like environmental consulting fees, contractor and lab fees, equipment and materials, regulatory oversight fees, which is a requirement for the grants, environmental insurance, and up to 5% of the total award can be allocated for project management of staff time for the applicant themselves. And again, that was brought in because a lot of smaller nonprofits or smaller community organizations may not necessarily have the resources to provide pay for somebody who could be doing work under this grant. And so that 5% is 5% of the total grant award. Next slide, please. And the last slide is desired outcomes. What is DTSC's goal with this funding? Our goal is to reduce environmental uncertainties, remove barriers to reuse planning, and make land safe for proposed reuse. DTSC is a science-based organization, and we are not a land use agency. So our comfortable place is really a place of science and making decisions based on environmental conditions at a site. Our role in helping revitalize California and provide reuse opportunities is really ensuring that sites are safe for the planned use or reuse at a site. But again, DTSC cannot make decisions on the final end use. But last, I just want to say we encourage you to apply for this new program, and we encourage environmental investigation and cleanup. We do have a website, dtsc.ca.gov/ECRG. And we also have an email set up for ECRG as well. It's ecrginfo@dtsc.ca.gov. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gregory, for that presentation. We would now like to open for questions. If you have any questions or comments regarding Gregory's presentation, you can ask them now. Again, we do want to show you the 3 ways you can participate with us. You can use Zoom audio. Simply use the raised hand feature and you will be invited to unmute your audio when it's your turn. If you are joining us by telephone, for phone audio, press *9 to join the phone queue. At that time, I will say the last digits of your phone number. And when it's your turn, simply press *6 to unmute your line. If you'd like me to read your question aloud, please type your question in the Q&A. And if you are joining us on the Spanish audio, please notify Brittany when you have a question and she will ask the question for you. At this time, I see that we have a few questions that have come in. We also have a couple of our attendees with their hands raised. I am going to start with our telephone participant, and their last digits are 562. Again, that's 562. If you could please press *6 to unmute your line and ask your question.
Hi, just to confirm, you can hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, my name is Carolyn Graves. I live in Richmond, California. The site I am most involved in, but it's not the only one I know about, is the Zeneca site. And I'm curious about what the speaker presented, because the Zeneca site is a very large and complex site. The community has had a CAG for nearly 20 years. It's very close to 20 years. Started with the Water Board and now is with DTSC. The international company is AstraZeneca. That's the responsible party. They purchased the Stouffer Chemicals company, which had operated here for over 100 years. Now it's going to be capped. It's a shoreline site. The community has voiced strongly. We had agreement with DTSC, the widespread community, that the toxics would be hauled out. Now they're going to leave them in place. And we've heard at other meetings where DTSC weighed the pros and cons of moving the toxics, but there's no addressing the toxics that are leaking off-site now. And we're concerned that with the plan to just cap it and build on it, that this new program as well is going to do this at other sites where they're not addressing the toxics that are leaving the site. And we've heard of this from other communities as well. And I would like it addressed as to how can the community force DTSC to look at the issue of toxics leaking off-site when the only plan is to pour concrete on top and nothing to keep the toxics in place? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Graves. And I know as you started that question to Gregory, you did attempt to say that this program may in fact cause similar issues there. I want to know if Gregory can address that. And I believe there were some additional questions of concern there, Ms. Graves, that I will ask following Gregory if our Deputy Director Grant could address as well. So Gregory, do you want to take that first, please?
Sure. For any remedy that is proposed under ECRG, it will follow, DTSC's standard community engagement process to provide and solicit input from the community. The funding availability for cleanups will be determined on what is proposed by the applicant. So either the city or the nonprofit or the tribe who applies for the funds. DTSC is not limiting their options for which type of remedy they would like to implement when they apply for ECRG. So it will really be dependent on what the cleanup that is proposed by the applicant in these situations.
Yeah, and I would this is Grant Cope, Deputy Director over the cleanup program. Thank you very much for the question. I would just add on two quick things. First is whenever there's a remedy that's approved or any work that would be done under the Brownfields Grant Program, there are certain criteria that are required to be met under state law. The number one criteria is protection of public health. Similar to the Zeneca site, DTSC kind of weighed, I think was the phrase that was used, weighed the pros and cons. We did a little bit more than that, and I just want to clarify it. There are statutory criteria that we must go through. Number one is it has to be protective. Number two, it has to comply with all local, federal, and state laws, whatever the cleanup is. If it doesn't comply with any of those local, federal, state law, or if it's not protective, we will not approve the remedy. So the level of protection, essential. There are a variety of other factors that go into our determination on whether we would approve a remedy. I know, Carolyn, I've described these to you, and they're laid out very systematically in our decision documents. In terms of off-site contaminants, we meet with you regularly with the CAG and really appreciate the time that you guys have put in over the years working on the Zeneca site with us. We'd be more than happy to track down any additional information that you have regarding any ongoing releases. If there's an ongoing release that we haven't found yet through the characterization, we would require the responsible parties to address it. So, it can be, you've got my email, you've got Ian's email as well. Please give us a message, give a call, and we can definitely talk through whatever you'd like to talk about.
Thank you, Greg. Thank you, Gregory. And thank you, Ms. Graves, for your question this evening. At this time, I see, hello, Cynthia Babbage. If you could please unmute and state your question.
Hi, thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Great. I actually have two comments and a question based on the last presentation. One is, I don't understand why we have to put in an application to ask for help from the agency when obviously looking at your CalEnviroScreen map, you already know where the 75% and above communities are. My second comment is that 5% for staff time is not enough. If the project were to be a $100,000 award, that would leave $5,000 for the community, who most often has the most expertise on these sites, to be paid in their engagement. And my third question is that it's very super frustrating to constantly hear how land use decisions aren't being made by the agency. And it's not just your agency, many agencies say this. And lack of cleanups leads to land use decisions that are not promoting community health or beneficial to the community uses. So it seems like land use authority is just tossed around like a game of hot potato. And I think that a solution to that would be, especially going back to my first statement, how you already know where 75% and above communities are, that you and other agencies get together to inform the local land use decision makers about proper steps for transformation of current land uses as well as paths moving forward. Because I know that they look to the environmental agencies, and you simply throwing your hands up and saying we don't make land use decisions is a total cop-out, because you are making them. So how can the agency address some kind of a change in the way that land use decision can be more done more collaboratively? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Cynthia. And that was definitely a two-part question with a third comment followed up by a question. A few of those I believe Gregory can address. And again, I am going to ask our Deputy Director Grant to follow up. The first was in reference to putting in an application for the Revitalization Grants Program and why that needed to be done in relation to those communities we know that are at 75%. Secondly, 5% set aside for staff, and the fact that that was a number you believe to be insufficient. So Gregory, if you could address those two issues, please.
To the first point, while we do have these areas designated as, the highest environmental burdens, we don't necessarily know source areas or individual properties where some of this contamination may be being sourced from. Now, we really rely on things like EnviroStore or GeoTracker, which are factors that are built into the Cal EnviroScreen scores. But a lot of those sites that are built in there are actually coming from voluntary oversight applications. So many times we don't know about a site until somebody comes to us voluntarily to say, our site is contaminated, or this neighboring site to us is contaminated. So that is why, an application really is crucial for this grant program. The second point that you made about 5% for staff time, that was something that was not initially costed out into our program, because the goal of the money really is to go towards cleaning up and investigating these properties. So we want to focus, less on reimbursement of staff time and more on getting sites actually cleaned up and safer for communities. The 5% was allocated, just like I mentioned during the presentation, with the understanding that some sites do require, nonprofits or other cities perhaps that don't have the means as larger cities do need a little bit of funding from this program to help implement it. And that 5% staff time is really intended to fund the position in terms of supporting the work that is required under the grant. So submitting invoices to DTSC for reimbursement and ensuring that the grant terms are met.
Thank you so much, Gregory. And there was a later part of that question that was in reference to what DTSC can do in working with other agencies in terms of addressing how exactly we look at these communities. And forgive me, I'm missing a part of my screen here, Grant. I am hoping you caught that latter portion that Cynthia shared with us. And if you can respond to that as well.
Yeah, no, it's a great point that Cynthia raises. Yeah. The issue of land use and how it interacts with our cleanups. I think it's also a great point that state agencies like DTSC can and should work with local governments, local people on issues that are important for their communities, including what land uses are allowed. In terms of our legal authority, what state law provides us with the legal authority to require. We have to look at what the reasonably anticipated future land use is. One of the key things in making that determination is it zoned residential? Is it zoned industrial? And if something is zoned industrial, our legal authority is focused on protecting the uses that would be industrial on that site. I know that a number of people, and a number of people, including across the state service, I'm sure, would like to see everything cleaned up to residential. Our legal authority, once again, is focused on what is reasonably anticipated future land use for a site, and that is largely informed, not solely, but largely informed by what the local land use decisions are. But in terms of Cynthia's point, working with local governments, working with people on these issues, I think it's really well taken.
Thank you so much, Grant. This time, I am going to review some of the questions and read those aloud to everyone that have been coming in the Q&A text feature. There's one here from Julia of Green Action. Thank you for speaking at the protest yesterday, Dr. Williams. What is DTSC's plan to address the impacts of sea level rise on the toxins being capped at sea level next to the vulnerable communities like the Hunters Point shipyard site?
And I don't know if Grant wants to join me in the response to this question also. We have recognized the potential for sea level rise to impact contaminated sites around the bay. And so we are taking a look. We've assigned a number of staff to start really digging into the question. Of course, everything related to climate change is happening much faster than we thought. So time is of the essence. We're participating in a group out of the Bay Area that's going to have a regional workshop. And that planning effort started last week. And as you well know, in Green Action, and we're looking forward to the dialogue that comes from that workshop related to how we protect communities and how we address potential impacts of sea level rise on groundwater and on other things related to any cleanups or any contaminated sites around the bay. I don't know, Grant, if you want to add anything beyond that.
Yeah, I would just two quick things. First of all, as the director said, we have assigned staff, reassigned really staff to work on this issue. It's not something that specifically called out in our budget. It's an important factor in our determination for a remedy being protective. And therefore, we've assigned this work to staff to come up with a way of essentially consistently making decisions across the state, understanding that every cleanup needs to consider site-specific factors. We are doing this not just on the local level collaboration that the director mentioned in the Bay Area, but we are also working with the experts on sea level rise for the state, really across the nation, through both OPR, Office of Planning and Research for the governor, and other federal and state agencies. So it's a collaboration effort on a local level and on a kind of broader statewide level to inform our decision-making and then using tools to make more consistent decisions across the state.
Thank you, Dr. Williams. Thank you, Grant. We also have a question here from Renee Jenkins. What suggested remedy or solutions are you expecting the community to provide when they're not the ones? Okay. In terms of our interactions with the community, what are some of the expectations in our interactions with the communities on suggestions that they may have towards our cleanups? And what would those look like? As a public participation specialist, Renee, I can tell you that our communities are very well versed in some of the issues that are pertaining to their community. They live there. We listen to you. So in terms of what they would like to see, we certainly take all of that into consideration. Many times you receive reports and research that has been conducted by those community members, As Deputy Director Grant has already indicated, we are bound by a number of items that we have to review. I'm going to ask him to go through that, our regulations, legal specifications, and policies. We work with the community to address those and inform them as we go through and how it relates to some of the suggestions that they are given. So that's an initial response. I will ask Deputy Director Grant also if he'd like to add anything to that at this time.
Yeah, just real briefly. So state, we have to also include, we want to, and by state law, we must solicit information from the public, as well as other state and local agencies. This is a critical part of what we do, not just in terms of being transparent, but also learning about what issues are important to the community. There are instances where I can point to that we have modified investigations. We have actually, one of the first sites that I dealt with when I was brought over to run the program was a site down south where originally it was going to be capped. And the public didn't want it to just be capped. They wanted contamination taken out. So I directed the staff to reopen the draft decision. And we implemented a removal of stockpiled soil that was on site and a cleanup of contamination on site as well. We're following that up with an offsite investigation, largely as a result of responding to the people's request for information about what contaminants may have come offsite over the years. This type of information for us is gold. We want it, we need it. That's what helps us do our job better.
Thank you so much, Grant. We also have a question here from Al. Last name is an initial M. He's concerned and has a question about the Board of Environmental Safety. And the question is whether or not DTSC and how can DTSC ensure that the board will be independent and will truly represent all members of mixed communities and environmental justice advocates, scientists, and engineers have a sense of objectivity.
If I may.
Yes, Dr. Williams.
Sure. So this is a great question that was really a focus of discussion as the reform effort was underway and as the statutory language was developed. The statute calls for very specific expertise. The process will go through the governor's office appointments process. DTSC is not assigning, is not identifying, is not responsible for the decisions about who sits on the board. That comes out of the governor's office and the appointments process there. Additionally, there will be one representative from the Assembly, and the Senate has already named a board member, and so the board is getting fleshed out, and there'll be a wide range of perspectives. And I think that the question is just critical, which is how do you have a board that has the wherewithal, the backbone, and is empowered to ask the tough questions of DTSC. And I think that's what everybody expects of this. And I think that's going to factor into the nominations process for identifying board candidates.
Thank you so much, Dr. Williams. At this time, I see a number of hands that are also raised. We are going to transition to those. And actually, just before I do that, I want to check in with our interpreter. And Brittany, if you could please let me know if there are any questions coming in for our Spanish audio. We do not have any at this time, so I'm going to move on to our raised hands. Deborah Bayer, if you could please unmute yourself.
Thank you so much. I want to respond to what Cynthia said, because I thought it really deserves underscoring. The Richmond City Council was told by, or at least parrots, the DTSC's approval of using the Zeneca site, which is loaded with poisons and which is right at sea level on a marsh, saying that the development is safe because the DTSC has approved it. So they think, so if you say, when the DTSC says you don't make land use decisions, you do, because cities are quoting you and are saying, holding up DTSC approval as saying, okay, we can go ahead with this development because the DTSC has said it's okay. But the DTSC, in the case of the Zeneca site, has not factored in sea level rise. And the CAG, which has been working on this and knows so much about the site, has been asking for the DTSC to take another look at the environmental impact report, which they approved. They said no problems with it because you have a recommended solution, but the solution did not factor in sea level rise, which will mobilize the arsenic right there on the site and will also make the SVE wells less effective as the ground gets wet. And really, all I want is for the DTSC to take another look and factor in the sea level rise. And you have refused to do it. You've told the CAG repeatedly, no, in 5 years, we can look at it if it becomes a problem in 5 years. But I do want to point out the California Coastal Commission, I think today, recommended that the state prepare for sea level rise higher than what the DTSC is estimating by moving roads, sanitary waste facilities, airports inland, because they say it's coming and it could be high. So that's my comment. Thank you. And I'd really like an answer on this.
Thank you, Deborah. I believe Deputy Director Grant, yes, go ahead.
Yeah, hey there. Thank you very much for the question. Zeneca is a very important site. I just want to contrast the situation that where land use, whether it be Zeneca or another site, affects our decision-making and how. So if a local government has declared something to be zoned it to be industrial, in that instance, we couldn't just require, because we wanted to, residential cleanup levels. We can require cleanup to industrial levels that would protect workers in an industrial setting, essentially. But our legal authority is limited in our ability to require cleanup to residential in those settings. With Zeneca, we did make a finding that we could require a cleanup that would protect essentially mixed use commercial residential structures, including looking at sea level rise. And we will, and so just to clearly talk about the arsenic, the VOCs on site, we have documented in the decision and in subsequent correspondence on the site our ability to continue to implement the cleanup in a way that is protective. And we will take a look at this, not if it becomes a problem in 5 years. We will take a look at it every 5 years because that's what happens whenever waste is left in place. We need to go back every 5 years and take a look at it to make certain that the systems that are in place are still functioning. And if they're not, or if there's analysis that shows the initial decision that we reached is inaccurate now, given significant new information, we will revise what we determined earlier and require the responsible parties to take actions that make certain that people are protected at the site. So that, that's kind of how our legal authority works with information, and specific to Zeneca, that we were very transparent in the analysis we did on sea level rise, the existing systems that we have in place to address intrusion, and the process that we use, which is used all across the country to take into account information during a 5-year review.
Thank you, Grant. At this time, Melanie Winter, if you could unmute yourself and ask your question.
I hope you can hear me. I'm out on the street, so it's a
can
little
hear you.
noisy. Okay, good. My question is sort of like what we're talking about with the impact of sea level rise, but it goes beyond that to other climate impacts like inland flooding and even fire in some instances. And I'm wondering if there's anything in statute that would allow you to, I guess, do better due diligence on in areas where you're going to see flooding. I'm in Southern California. I'm in Los Angeles, and there are a number of contaminated properties along the Los Angeles River and its tributaries, which will be inundated as more flooding occurs. Most of these sites are industrial. My understanding is DTSC your jurisdiction ends at the soil layer and doesn't account for what will mobilize and saturate to groundwater. So even if you cap something in a floodplain and you get a site inundated, those contaminants will be mobilized and get to groundwater and possibly to surface waters, depending on where you are in the watershed. So similar to the concerns about sea level rise, it sounds like you're not statutorily empowered to consider either land use, consider what an appropriate level of cleanup is given climate impacts that we know are coming. And it also, my understanding is your jurisdiction ends at the soil layer and doesn't even consider, that tosses over to the state board when we're talking about mobilization to groundwater. And am I correct in those? And could you see an appropriate statutory shift that could allow the agency to be more climate forward and public health protective at the nexus of public health and climate change and contamination and habitability? Sorry, I'm not being very articulate right now.
Thank you, Melanie. I see our Grant, our deputy director, already poised to respond. So we're going to let him go ahead and address that.
Yeah, good evening, Melanie. Thank you very much for the question. All really good questions. First, on the extent of our authority, we do have authority to protect groundwater resources. There is some overlap with the water board, but not so much on a site-by-site basis. It's we work really well with our regional water board partners, and where they have better, kind of more capacity or history with the site, we work with them to say, okay, this is yours, and we'll continue to work on other sites. Zeneca is an example where at one point the water board, and I think earlier Ms. Graves mentioned this, the water board worked on it, did require the responsible party to do some work, and then transferred it over to us. So both the water board and us, we work pretty closely together, coordinate our actions, and DTSC can respond to those types of issues. At Zeneca, for example, we have a number, without getting into the details, we have a number of different systems that are set up right now, given the levels of arsenic in the rock, essentially, that's there from past industrial operations. It's got high levels of arsenic in it. Arsenic is naturally occurring in a lot of soil across California, a lot of rocks across California. And so we set up a slurry wall, we set up a biological treatment barrier. There are systems that we have already that are meant to address the arsenic in groundwater. What we're focused on right now is using the authority that we have, which is fairly broad, to provide our staff with better tools to make more consistent decisions. The thought is by enhancing their ability to rely on experts in sea level rise. We're not experts in sea level rise, so we'll be relying on like the Ocean Protection Council, ECDC, other government agencies on how much to expect sea level to rise. we won't be generating that data. We'll be using their data. Where our expertise is solid is what is the engineering response to address a potential threat that could be enhanced due to sea level rise or fires or other stochastic events, other significant events. We've ran into this already with wildfires. Wildfires have affected mining sites, for example, where there are treatment systems that stop acid mine drainage from going into public waterways. These are all, it's a legacy of contamination and a legacy of resource extraction that we're dealing with. It's well over a century worth of those types of activities in California. And it's our mission to, where we have the resources to address it, or the enforcement authority to require a responsible party to address it, we do so.
Thank you, Grant. Now, Sarah Tobin, if you would mute yourself, please, and ask your question.
Yes, thank you very much. I'd like to follow up a little bit on something that seemed to be woven throughout the presentation, and that is that it seems as if DTSC is talking about relying on the public for cleanup leads. And there was one mention early on about offsite contaminants that the DTSC, this was in, I think, Grant Cope's response, that the DTSC was more than happy to track ongoing releases. But the implication seemed to be that the public and community had to find them. And then later on, there were comments about the expectations of community members, that communities are very well versed. But this contrasts substantially with the behavior of DTSC for the CAG, for the Zeneca site, and the impression that members who've worked on this site for 15 to 20 years really feel that they have been used as window dressing, and then their feedback has been ignored. So, why is it that we're hearing the same kinds of things about how wonderful community input is, but we're not seeing protective action with regard to the community? And in particular, I'm very concerned about the 5-year periodic reviews when there are going to be 4,000 residential units built on the site. These are going to be people's major investments for themselves and their families. And to talk about that you will take remedies, that might involve removal of buildings. So, I mean, I'm just very alarmed by all of this. And I would like to see a bit more of a strict cleanup by the responsible party that created the massive Superfund qualified site at Zeneca, and to get them to clean it up. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah.
Yeah, just to jump in quickly. So I apologize if there was any misstatement on my part about DTSC not having the information that it believes it's needed at Zeneca or other sites to characterize where the contamination is. We are very confident in our characterization of contamination at Zeneca. It has been extensively investigated. My only point in speaking to whether it be members of the CAG or a representative from another local community group near another site, anybody, is we are not all knowing, all seeing. We are public servants, and we want to engage with people because we're in their community. And so if they have information, and so, for example, with the CAG at Zeneca, we meet with them regularly and have for years and years. So my only point in saying that is whether it be Zeneca, whether it be Peterborough, whether it be Hunters Point, whether it be anywhere, where we are engaged. We want to hear from the public. And if they do have information, or if they do have a perspective that is different than ours, we want to listen to that. We want to learn from it. And we want to be able to integrate that into our decision making.
Thank you, Grant. We're going to have another question here that was actually sent in via the Q&A before we have to move on to our next presentation. And please, everyone, note that the other questions in the Q&A, after that presentation, we will go through those, and we will continue to address questions that are coming in via the audio for Zoom or your raised hand. So if you need to jot down that question, please do so. So this last question here is related to the Equitable Community Revitalization Grants presentation, as well as the new DTSC board. And it asked, will the new DTSC board be reviewing the environmental impact reports for every brownfield proposal? And I'm going to ask Gregory if you want to, I see Dr. Williams is poised to respond. Dr. Williams?
Yeah, so the responsibility of the board were called out in statute, and they have a pretty significant workload to take on as they come up to speed. That doesn't mean they can't take on additional responsibilities. Their primary responsibilities will be to hear permit appeals. So that's one of the top priorities for them. They also are going to oversee the development of a hazardous waste management plan for the state, which will really establish a roadmap for how we can reduce the use of toxic materials in California over the long term. And there will be additional responsibilities, but number one, they're a part-time board, and we aren't necessarily counting on them to have the expertise that would be required to review EIRs. And so at this time, there's no vision for them to review all the EIRs for all of the cleanups.
Thank you, Dr. Williams. And again, to all of you, please note that for the questions that remain in the Q&A, we will get to those following our next presentation, and we will address the questions for those of you who have your hands raised as well in the Zoom. So if you need to, please jot those questions down, and we will be with you in just a moment. I do want to thank you for the questions that have been asked at this time. And if you have additional questions specific to the Equitable Community Revitalization Grant, please contact Gregory at ECRG-info. That's ECRG-info, dtsc.ca.gov. And at this time, I'd like to introduce our next presenter, Wayne Lorenzen, who will discuss metal shredders. Wayne?
Thank you, Michelle, and hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. My name is Wayne Lorenzen. I'm the Division Chief for Permitting at DTSC, and I'm really happy to be here tonight. I'll be providing information tonight about DTSC's current metal shredding facility initiative, which includes an emergency rulemaking submittal from DTSC. I want to acknowledge all of you who participated in previous workshops. We all want you to know that we listened to you during those workshops, and we're ready to share information about our plans to protect communities from hazards associated with metal shredding facilities. Next slide. So I'll take us through some of the following topics. I'll give you some information on a report that DTSC released and the findings of the report. We want you to know about an emergency rulemaking that we have initiated. I'd like to provide a little bit of context around interim protections that will apply. Then I'll talk a little bit about permits and how they fit in the context of metal shredders. And then finally give you some information about the timeline for this initiative and what to expect next. Next slide. Before I talk about the report, I'd like to say that DTSC recognizes that metal shredders play an important role in the recycling of scrap metal. Their continued operation is vital. However, their operations need to meet protective standards to ensure the safety of the communities surrounding them, and any contamination that's caused by their operations must be addressed. We need robust recycling pathways for many of the materials that we live with. Used oil, precious metals, and e-waste are some materials that we focus a lot of effort on recycling. Recycling businesses are an important component of sustainable growth in the state, but it's important that they operate in a protective manner. California is taking the lead on the regulation of scrap metal recycling facilities that have metal shredding operations, which have been recognized nationally as a threat to health and the environment. Just last month in July, US EPA distributed an alert noting that many metal shredder facilities are posing threats to clean air laws because significant amounts of non-metal materials are contained in the shredded materials, which can vaporize and spread through the air. These materials include plastics, paints, sealants, rubber, switches, and fluids. As most of you may know, over the past several years, DTSC has been taking a closer look at metal shredding facilities in environmental justice communities and dedicated resources to the enforcement activities against those where we identified violations. In February, a joint prosecution team, which includes DTSC, reached a $4.1 million settlement with Schnitzer Steel, a metal shredding facility which has repeatedly released hazardous waste from its metal shredding operations within an environmental justice community in West Oakland. DTSC ordered Schnitzer to immediately begin the process to stop releases and ultimately clean up its metal shredding operations. Last week, DTSC issued a report titled The Evaluation and Analysis of Metal Shredding Facilities and Metal Shredder Wastes that highlights its evaluation of the metal shredding industry. Among other things, the report identifies the ongoing threats to human health and the environment posed by activities conducted at metal shredding facilities. Metal shredding facilities release hazardous constituents to air, water, and soil, including light fibrous material. DTSC has also determined that corrective action is required at most of the metal shredding facilities to address ongoing and historical releases. Next slide. So a little bit about emergency rulemaking. Concurrent with the report that we issued last week, we notified stakeholders that we intended to submit an emergency rulemaking package to address the findings in the report. The emergency rulemaking package will revise the California definition of scrap metal to mirror US EPA's definition. Under the new definition for California, metal shredding facilities must manage their metal shredder output as hazardous waste, subjecting those facilities to requirements under the Hazardous Waste Control Law. But most importantly, the emergency rulemaking sets us up for a pathway to permits for metal shredding facilities. Permits provide an instrument of protection by setting more robust operating rules. With an eye toward protecting human health and the environment, DTSC scientists, engineers, geologists, engineering geologists, toxicologists, lawyers, and environmental planners are very adept at identifying protections before issuing a draft permit. And then we follow that up with asking for expertise and input from community members before making a final decision. Our vision with these facilities are safer operating metal shredding facilities. I'll give you more information about how to be involved in the rulemaking process in a bit. But I wanted to say that regardless of the outcome of our proposed rulemaking, DTSC plans to continue robust oversight of all metal shredding facilities. Next slide. With this rulemaking, we are essentially changing the rules, and federal and state law require interim protections for operations of businesses that must comply with new rules. If this rulemaking package that we submitted is approved, existing metal shredding facilities will be able to operate under more protective standards called interim protections if they apply for hazardous waste facility permits. Operating requirements, including these interim protections, are clear in our regulations. They must be complied with and they are enforceable. Metal shredders will be able to operate for up to 5 years under these protections unless DTSC makes a permit decision beforehand, which we plan to do. Interim protections protect nearby communities because they include requirements to prevent releases, conduct environmental monitoring, and establish financial assurance, which sets aside funding to pay for costs of closure and corrective action. Next slide. So we anticipate receiving permit applications from the metal shredders if this emergency rulemaking package is approved. Permit applications must meet even higher standards than the interim protections required under federal and state law that we just talked about. A permit application is the facility's proposed operations plan. It's designed to describe how the operation will meet all of the requirements in our regulations. For example, tanks and other equipment used in these operations must meet a higher standard for seismic stability than would be required for other types of businesses because they manage hazardous waste. A permit decision is more than just a yes or no decision. DTSC changes the way facilities operate by holding them to the higher standards and adding permit conditions to ensure operations are protective. Permit decisions are also discretionary, so we look at environmental impacts through our CEQA process. We look at 20 resource areas, including air quality, aesthetics, groundwater, hazardous materials, and all of the others, to evaluate how our decision impacts any of them. And then we also look at cumulative impacts under CEQA, but we'll also look at CalEnviroscreen scores for nearby areas to identify known cumulative burdens and how those fit within the context of a permit decision. So again, I just wanted to say again that our vision with these facilities is metal shredding facilities operating more protectively with permits. Next slide. So a little bit about what to expect next. Today, on August 31st and through September 7th, is a public comment period established for our rulemaking with the Office of Administrative Law. This will be an Office of Administrative Law decision, so the comments will be evaluated by them. We're anticipating an Office of Administrative Law decision by September 9th. If approved, and if metal shredders would like to operate, they must submit Part A permit applications within 30 days of the decision that we expect on September 9th. Metal shredders must also submit notifications within 90 days that they are managing hazardous waste. DTSC plans to acknowledge operations under interim protections upon the required submittals. We're also requiring Part B permit applications within 60 days after that acknowledgement. That's part of our regulations. But we anticipate requests for extensions for submittals of those Part B applications. We're also ready to hold pre-application meetings with applicants to discuss expectations for the permit applications. Then we'll review those proposed operations over the following 13 months, and our goal is to make permit decisions in 2 years. Next slide. If you would like to participate in the emergency rulemaking, these are the contacts to submit comments to. A copy of the comment must also be submitted to DTSC's Office of Legislation and Regulatory Review. The Office of Administrative Law will confirm that the agency has received the comment before considering it. If you provide comments, it must state that it is about an emergency rulemaking action currently under Office of Administrative Law Review and include the topic of the emergency, which for this initiative is the scrap metal definition revision. There is more information on our website. If you go to the home page, you'll be able to find links. And we have established a mailbox for any questions you might have regarding our process. And I think that will be shared later in the slides, but it's mswstakeholders@dtsc.ca.gov. Please don't submit your comments to that email address if you would like them considered for the emergency rulemaking. The comments go to the contacts listed here. And that's all of my presentation. Thank you. And I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you so much, Wayne. Again, we are going to open up for questions. And if you have any questions this evening about Wayne's presentation regarding metal shredders, again, that we ask that you use either Zoom audio by raising your hand feature, your phone audio by pressing *9 to join the queue, or to simply type your question into the Q&A. And again, if you are joining us on Spanish audio, please notify Brittany when you have a question, and she will ask the question for you. And I am going to start this round by inquiring with Brittany to see if we have any questions coming in for our Spanish audio. Thank you so much, Brittany. I'm now going to go to those who have their hands raised in the Zoom audio. I will take the first 4 that are listed, and then we are going to transition back to the Q&A. I'm going to start with David Cafton. David, please unmute yourself.
Hello, can you hear me now?
I can hear you, yes.
Great. I wanted to talk a little more about the Zeneca site. Is that proper now, or do I have to wait till later?
Well, your hand is up right now. You can go ahead and ask the question. I am going to ask that those who have metal shredder questions, if we could get to some of those, but please go ahead and ask if you could do a quick question.
Oh, well, the gentleman talked about that there's a 5-year review at a Superfund site where they've left almost all the poisons in the soil. And it seems that that is really too late, that there should be a review ongoing at least every 6 months or annually. And there's no monitoring of people's health, animal and plant health in the surrounding area, in the bay. There's no baselines being established. It seems very weak when you have a Superfund site and you wait 5 years and find a significant problem and you have the buildings all built out. And what are you going to do? And earlier it was asked, what about keeping all the poisons present under the cap when there's no barriers to it spreading out in all directions? That's what I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, David. And I think your question really is centered upon that 5-year for a Superfund site. And I know we can speak to some of the other monitoring and that's occurring on site. So if we could perhaps, Grant, if you could speak to that.
Sure. As to monitoring, there are monitors on the site to catch any essential releases that would be getting past the treatment system. So there's monitoring going on in terms of baseline conditions. I know that there has been some work done on some species in the bay. But I would defer to our, environmental scientists and the team on the information that we would have that we could use as some type of baseline, as David suggested. In terms of the 5-year review, that's pretty standard practice. There will be a cap over the contamination. And as I referenced earlier, there are systems right now in place to essentially shunt the groundwater towards a treatment system and make certain that it's not spreading out in all directions. So the cap over the contamination, the rocks that are there, that would reduce water infiltration. And then the systems that are set up, once again, are there to treat the arsenic in the groundwater. And then there's monitoring that is going on.
Thank you so much, Grant. See, we have a hand raised from Jeff Verano. Jeff, could you unmute yourself, please?
Yes, hello?
Yes, please ask your question.
Yes, hi, sorry, I don't know why the name came as Jeff Verano. My name is Brian Lopez, and I'm an advocate with the Recicladores Unidos. And I would appreciate it if the EPA can come down here and meet with us and hear our concerns about losing our livelihood from what we earn from recycling on a daily basis.
Thank you, Jeff. And actually, if you could type in the QA for me, I want to reach out to you as well.
Okay.
The contact. Thank you so much, because I see it. I'm sorry, and give me your name again.
Brian Lopez.
Thank you, Brian. Please go ahead, type that in the Q&A for me so we can reach out.
Awesome. Just my name and contact information, right? Okay.
Yes, please.
Thank you.
Next, we have Robert Hoffman. Robert, please unmute yourself and ask your question.
Yeah, hi. I could hear in Wayne's presentation that there's an assumption that at least some of the metal shredders will apply for permits. And I'm wondering, what are the department's contingency plans for the scrap metal that is being recycled, the literally thousands of tons of scrap metal that are being recycled by facilities that choose not to apply for a permit?
Wayne, if you could address that, please. Thank you, Robert.
Thanks, Robert. Yeah, I hope I didn't misconstrue that. We anticipate metal shredders submitting permit applications. The law requires that for under interim protections, interim status, it requires for continuing operations that those types of facilities that are subject to new requirements submit permit applications in order to operate. So that is why we anticipate receiving permit applications from metal shredding facilities. We don't know what they'll look like. We don't know what they'll propose, but we do anticipate receiving them.
Thank you, Wayne. We also have a question here from David Renfrew. It indicates metal shredders have been working for a long time. Is there a reason why the proposed regulatory change is needed as an emergency rulemaking process, as opposed to a normal rule change with a longer comment period?
I'll take that. We will have both. So our plan is, with this emergency rulemaking, we consider this an emergency because of the release of our report. We've been finalizing that report over the course of a long period of time, and we just released it last week. That's the subject of the emergency. But we plan to follow that up with a regular rulemaking, which is also a requirement from the Office of Administrative Law. So there will be multiple opportunities to participate and make comments through the Office of Administrative Law. Once for the emergency rulemaking, and then second, if it's approved, through a regular rulemaking process.
Thank you so much, Wayne. I have another question here from James Goyich. Is the DTSC going to require closure cost funds retention for each site that the DTSC approves hazardous shredder operations at?
Thank you for that question. Yes, we will. We're expecting permit applications to come in. One of the protections under interim protections that we're calling it under Title 22, it's in our regulations, but it requires the submittal of a closure plan and a cost estimate before we make a permit decision. So we anticipate getting those closure plans within, I can't remember what the time period is off the top of my head. I want to say it's somewhere between 6 and 9 months. We'll get those closure plans, we'll evaluate them, we'll make sure that they meet all of the standards in the regulations for interim protections. And then at the point that we approve that closure plan, there's a provision for facilities to post and fund financial assurance mechanisms for the closure cost.
Thank you, Wayne. We also have a question here from Robert Hoffman. Wayne mentioned that the EnviroStore will be factored in for metal shredder that applies for a permit. Can you please explain how a high score would impact the permitting decision?
Thank you. I'm assuming you mean Cal EnviroScreen and not EnviroStore. But yes, we look at Cal EnviroScreen to determine how our permit decision fits into the context of those burdens that are most heavily prominent in those areas of the state. So we look at Cal EnviroScreen for when we make permit decisions, just to determine we don't look at it to make a permit decision, but we look at it in the context of how our permit decision impacts those burdens already established in that area.
Thank you. We also have a question here from Andrew, and please, Andrew, forgive me if I say your last name incorrectly, Madugno. So for metal shredders, will the permits for these operations be a statewide permit? Or will it go through the local city or county? Will the permits be granted for operations near schools or residences?
Thanks again for the question. These will be statewide permits. They will be issued by DTSC. They will be permit decisions. So it is possible that we can deny permit applications. We look at everything when we're evaluating the proposed operations for a facility, including proximity to schools and many other things, before making a draft decision and then rolling that out to the communities and to interested stakeholders for input before making a final decision. But it will be a DTSC decision.
Thank you. We have a follow-up from David Renfrew. He's asking, DTSC's economic impact statement says that there's no financial impact. Do you feel that this is accurate?
Yeah, I'll take that. As part of
Thank
the
you, Wayne.
As part of the emergency rulemaking package, we do believe that there's no fiscal impact associated with the emergency rulemaking.
Thank you. And I see here we do have one hand raised. And Robert Hoffman, I see your hand up. Is this a follow-up or a separate question? You can lower your hand. You can unmute yourself, please. Robert, are you there?
I am. It's challenging to unmute in this particular system. I apologize. Well, I had a different question, but Wayne, if you said during your presentation that this will fundamentally change the law, and then you said there's no fiscal impact, how do you reconcile that?
How do we reconcile the fact that our rulemaking doesn't have any fiscal impact?
Yeah, if your rulemaking changes the law such that these are would now be subject to permits, how can you say that has no fiscal impact?
Wayne, maybe I could answer that question. Hi, Bob. So the emergency regulation, the fiscal impacts for adopting the scrap metal definition, there is no fiscal impacts with that. What we're doing is we're aligning our scrap metal definition to be aligned with the federal rule, and our analysis indicate there's no fiscal impacts for the emergency regulations. Thank you.
Thank you, Rizgar. Thank you, Wayne. Now going to transition back to the Q&A that have been typed in. Let's see here from Andrew again. Andrew Badugno, will the closure plans require groundwater sampling below the facility?
The closure plans are, well, that depends. So closure plans usually outline the procedures that a facility will follow to return that facility back to beneficial use. Most of the time, that's done through contingent sampling. So there's sampling requirements associated with closure. So whatever it is, however a facility chooses to close, sampling and analysis has to confirm that they're not leaving waste behind. So if there is contamination left behind, that would be part of the closure plan contingencies. So yes, we do look at contamination to groundwater when we're looking at closure plans.
Thank you, Wayne. I'm now going to go back to some of the questions that were put in the Q&A earlier on. We didn't have an opportunity to get to those. Dr. Williams, there is a question specifically for you. It's a general question asking why or what was your desire in taking the job as the director of the Department of Toxic Substances Control?
Thanks, Michelle. And I will not give my full biography, but needless to say, my path to this position was not a direct one. I started off in the private sector. I worked for an environmental nonprofit for a while that did a lot of science. I've really been focused on science and technology throughout my career. And then I joined, of course, to do the Safer Consumer Products program and oversee the initial implementation that our deputy Carl Palmer is now responsible for. And so, you know, I'll be quite frank, this job is considered to be a tough job. And there are reasons that I will stick with it and have stuck with it. I think of, for instance, I was very surprised when I joined the department. I thought I had been doing good work in terms of being working for this environmental nonprofit and feeling good about, you know, having environmental protection from that standpoint. But honestly, I was almost shocked at how much commitment I saw from DTSC staff and the fact that people take their public service so seriously. And ultimately it rubbed off on me, and we do take it very seriously, and we understand the gravity of the decisions we make. I also took the position because I thought I had some things to offer in terms of just being willing to take on the department, just fortitude for being able to take on a department that really has had some challenges, and really partner with the secretary and partner with people across government, in the legislature, and amongst our stakeholders to really address some of the long-standing concerns about the department. And I think in some ways we've been successful at some of that. And then, you know, when I am alone and quiet and reflecting on why I do this job, I quite honestly remember a radio piece about lead poisoning and the impact that it had on African-American young males in particular in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And it angered me, it frustrated me, it motivated me, and it still motivates me now that lead is a problem that we all know about. We've known about it for Lord knows how long. Lead, mercury, some of these other chemicals that are out in the environment. And we just, it brings a sense of urgency to can we at least address the things that we have known are problems for a long time? And what are the tools that we have to do that? And how can we do that? And so I'm still looking for those solutions. I can't say I have the magic wand that's going to fix any of them, but it does continue to motivate me.
Thank you so much, Dr. Williams. We also have a question here from, let's see. Appears to be, my name is Graham Smith, okay, the Better Watts Initiative. I was curious to learn if any administrative changes are being implemented at DTSC that will impact the new grant program. The reason the question is being asked is because a 2020 paper by Campbell Eckert and Kim found that DTSC administrative processes may be difficult for some communities in terms of providing input, even when they are participating, but having that information and knowledge base. So how is DTSC working to change this? And how will this new grant program take these findings into account? So Gregory, if you could respond to that question, please.
Sure. Unfortunately, I'm not familiar with that specific paper that's referenced. I'm not aware of any substantial administrative changes that are being made to accommodate the new grant program. We are hiring, or not necessarily hiring, but we are concentrating a core group of staff that will be handling all of these projects to try and expedite these investigations and cleanups, because there is that 2-year timeline for any of these grant programs. So again, unfortunately, I can't speak to how our grant may or may not be incorporating some of the findings of that paper, because I'm not familiar with it. It will, any of the grants that are under DTSC oversight will follow our standard community engagement process.
Thank you, Gregory. And Grant, did you have something to add?
Yeah. First of all, I definitely want to thank the person for raising the issue, and would love to take a look at the study. I have to confess ignorance over the study. Unfortunately, I haven't read it, but I'd love to take a look at it. And I would just, so maybe if you can drop a link in the chat or send it to me directly, either one would be great. My email address is grant.cope, C-O-P-E, @dtsc.ca.gov. And then, following, just building on what Greg said. So we've already begun to try and do outreach before the budget was even enacted to solicit input from the public. We had a listening session. We had a number of listening sessions where we wanted to hear from people. So we wanted to provide that opportunity. You've heard Greg reference tonight some changes that we made in the proposal going forward based on those listening sessions. We committed to, and we will do additional outreach for more focused input by the community in how the Brownfield Grant Program and the other programs under the budget are built out. In terms of the site-specific decisions and input from community, that's going to be essential. That will be essential. So one of the things that we're doing here at the Quarterly Public Forum, but also in the more programmatic outreach that we'll do through the cleanup program, is we want to hear from you about different ways that you think are best for interacting and for getting information from our program. We're trying to iterate. We're trying to do different things on reaching out into the community to provide information and getting input. But once again, we are not all knowing and all seeing. We really value the public's input on actions that they think would be effective. So please send the report and participate in the additional listening sessions that we'll be having on the Brownfields program and other programs.
Thank you so much, Grant. I have a question here from Winston Hickox. What other options beside a hazardous waste facility permit did you consider to accomplish your objective? And this is in relation to the metal shredders. And won't being labeled as a hazardous waste facility somehow stigmatize these recycling facilities?
I'll take that. This is
Wayne.
Yeah, so we did look at, and others looked at many other options for the initiative. However, we feel that the protections offered under a permit are necessary in the communities. That's the level of protection that we think is necessary. The other options they weren't as protective as operating under a permit. Hazardous waste permits, there's a lot of regulations to operate under a permit, and we feel that that's appropriate for metal shredding operations. And then to the question about the stigma, we hope that it doesn't. I've heard that offered up before, that people would think that they're purchasing hazardous waste. It's certainly not the case with things like used oil. Used oil is recycled in the state pretty heavily. That stigma is not associated with purchasing used oil. We certainly hope that it isn't associated with metal shredders. It's an important function. We recognize that those operations are important for the state's economy and for recycling initiatives in general. Certainly hope that that's not the case, that they're stigmatized.
Thank you, Wayne. We have a question here from Rabina Sual. She would like to know whether or not, if a metal shredder doesn't seek a permit, will they be shut down? Wayne?
Oh, yes, thank you. If a metal shredder does not submit a permit application, they will have no authorization to operate, and they will essentially be operating without authorization.
Thank you, Wayne.
I wanted to clarify, if the emergency rulemaking is approved.
Thank you. So we do have a question here in relation to the Exide site. And this goes to a land use. Are there potential or possible beneficial reuses for a site like the Exide lead battery recycling plant in East Los Angeles? It's a general question, but a potential reuse for that site once cleaned. And I'm not sure if Grant, perhaps you could take that one.
Yeah, I can say that the site is currently zoned industrial and is going through a cleanup process given it's over a century of operation. The state has made a significant commitment in resources to continue the cleanup subsequent to Exide going bankrupt. The owner of the site currently is a trust, and the eventual use of the site, how the site is disposed of, what uses are put to it, have yet to be determined. So we don't know yet. We're really focused right now on cleaning up the site, and as that progresses, it's possible that that there are other entities who are interested in using the site. We'll have to cross that bridge when we come to it, but we are focused like a laser right now on cleaning the site up.
Thank you so much, Grant. We also have a question here from Doria Mueller-Belschmidt. She's inquiring about reuse, particularly residential use or redevelopment on sites previously contaminated or contaminated with the barrier, and whether or not the highest possible remediation standards should be utilized to ensure that EPA and DTSC leadership wouldn't hesitate in allowing families to reside on the site, and that we could stop the existing legacy of environmental discrimination of vulnerable communities, in a sense, by generating these new residential locations.
Hi, I'm glad that we got to this question. I think it underscores a couple different really good points, and I'm jumping in because this was submitted during the ECRG presentation portion. To the first point of sites that are remediated for residential use, we do use our strictest cleanup standard, which we can call unrestricted use, to include residential. That is the only situation where we allow residential use after a cleanup, is if it meets unrestricted standards. So that is something that is already incorporated into our process. In terms of the part two of the question, indicating that it seems wrong to kind of concentrate housing on these contaminated sites, the DTSC is not proposing any specific reuse for any site that is applied for under our grant program. We really want the community to identify needs in their community and how the site can be remediated and support those needs. So Doria did give some examples of parks or recreation or community spaces. Those would all be great options and possible end uses for grants that are awarded in our program. And again, in the application process, we are just asking the applicant to identify a need in their community and how the redevelopment that they are looking at will fill that need.
Thank you so much, Gregory. I do have a follow-up question here, also from Cynthia Babbage. Grant, to some of the earlier discussion about zoning, she does raise some concerns about the fact that many of the areas are adjacent to environmental justice communities that are in transition with changing land uses, and that with our desperate housing shortage, some industrial and commercial sites are appealing for residential development, but they remain locked into some bad land use decisions. And essentially how then, and I think you have addressed this, in terms of those course corrections being made, and I will say, Cynthia, again, with some of our work with those local jurisdictions as we go through this process, and I'm not quite sure, Grant, if there's any additional information you would like to add for Cynthia here.
I guess just two things. One, just really quickly recognizing the good point that Cynthia raises regarding, historically discriminatory zoning, redlining in communities. That is it's a discriminatory fact that remains today in communities across, not just California, but across the nation. How we address that obviously is very important. As I referenced earlier, we do have limited jurisdiction there, but there are things that Cynthia raised. For example, how does DTSC work with locals? We can convene groups either on a local level or on a regional level that involves both community representatives as well as local governments who are generally charged with making these types of land use decisions. We can tell them about the experiences that we've had, both in working with community members who are frustrated by land use decisions, and what we can do or what we can lend to the conversation on how local governments can better structure their land use decisions so that it reflects, on a more neighborhood by neighborhood basis what people want. Ultimately, we can't force a local government to do it, but we can certainly convene conversations, stress the importance of responding to local input. And if that type of action is something that Cynthia is interested in, please feel free to reach out to me. or other people here at the department, we can continue to have that conversation and put something in motion.
Thank you so much, Grant. We do have another question here in relation to the AstraZeneca site. And that is, if in fact it's just determined to be unsafe in 5 years, what will be done with the housing that is already built? And will residents there have to be relocated?
So it would depend on what is found. If there, for example, and this happens with caps, they can develop cracks over time, and so they need to be maintained. In an instance where, let's say that there's a crack in a cap, and there's the potential for some type of pathway going from the material that's capped to where people are, we would require that cap to be essentially maintained, fill in the cracks, and then make certain that whatever remedial steps are taken are effective over time. If there's something, there's volatile organic compounds. If there is some lack of efficiency on the treatment technologies that are found, there are different types of technologies we can use. There's additional monitoring that we can require in buildings that are already existing to make certain that the individuals in those buildings are safe. And if we do find that there is a problem in terms of increased levels of volatiles going inside, there are systems that we can require, such as they're called mitigation systems, where you essentially shunt out fumes that might migrate into a structure before they go into the structures. So there's a variety of different steps that we can take depending on the type of contamination and the type of problem that's found.
Thank you so much, Grant. And I believe also in relation to the AstraZeneca site, there's questions here in relation to the treatment of arsenic on the site and whether or not the barrier is considered a mitigation for the arsenic, or are there other considerations taking place?
So I'm going to presume that the question is focused on the biological barrier, essentially microbes that are.
That's correct.
Yeah, that is that's a treatment system. Essentially, what they do is they fix levels of arsenic before it flows through the barrier completely to reduce the level of release going from the waste that's contained on site. So yeah, that is considered a treatment system.
Thank you so much, Grant. And I do want to inform everyone, thank you, Yvonne, for placing this here in the Q&A. If you are having some difficulty in relation to the chat was disabled for tonight's webinar. Please put your information in the Q&A if you would like to send any text messaging. And again, thank you so much, Yvonne. We also have a comment here from Megan Wong, and she is also with the Better Watts Initiative. She's indicated that DTSC has conducted lead and other heavy metal testing in Watts using discrete sampling. And she has a link here that she has provided relative to that. The community is reaching out to DTSC and would like to work with the department on other sampling methods, decision unit and multi-increment. And how could they best go about sharing that information and ensuring that they have more up-to-date soil sampling carried out in this particular community?
First of all,
yes, go ahead.
Yeah. First of all, thank you very much for reaching out to us on this issue. Exactly what we're hoping to get. So I would say I need to get you in contact with some staff who are down in the LA Basin, some DTSC staff who are down in the LA Basin, so we can better understand how we can help address both the methodology issues that you raised, but also the areas that you're talking about. If it's around Jordan Downs or if it's around other areas where we've done past work. So if you can provide us just your contact information, I'll get a hold of that and then get you in contact with people who are down south who can who can work with you.
Thank you so much, Grant. So Megan, again, in the Q&A, if you wouldn't mind putting your contact information, we'll make sure that you have a contact individual. And we are now going to transition. I have 2 hands raised, and I'm going to ask the caller with the last few digits 528. If you could please go ahead and press *6 to unmute yourself.
Hello, you hear me?
Yes, we can.
I read an article about lead poisoning. When children were poisoned with lead, 40 years later, they had like a decrease of 2 IQ points in addition to whatever problems they had in childhood from the lead, like developmental problems in their brain. And then they had brain mass loss, and which was linked to memory problems and confusion and early dementia. And they could end up having to retire early because of that. And I know I read in this study, it was an NIH study, it just came out. They just mentioned it on the NIH website this last year, the fall of last year. And that's why lead is found in a lot of metals, and that's why it could be really dangerous. And the second question is about the leachate out of the landfills that, it's just, are we measuring around the landfills to see what's happening, prevent that stuff from going in there that's leaching, like the radiation from fracking waste? And we should be measuring around all the landfills just to see what's happening so we don't find out last minute is a toxic waste site and needs to be cleaned up.
Thank you so much. And I see here that Deputy Director Grant, he's poised to respond. Grant, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much for raising the issue about lead's harmful impact on human health. It is a nasty metal. It harms just about every system in the human body, and there's no known safe level of lead in the blood of children. So when they're exposed and it gets into their system, scientists have yet to find any safe level. This is something that we work on across the state. We've got obviously the Exide cleanup. It's the largest residential lead contamination cleanup site in the country right now. And we've cleaned up more residences more quickly than any other site, residential lead cleanup site in the nation. We've got the lead acid battery recycling cleanup program that is essentially charged with looking at different areas where there were smelters of lead acid batteries in the past and doing an assessment on what potential releases occurred either on-site or off-site, and then working to clean them up where we find contamination at levels that threaten public health. So extremely important. Thank you for raising the issue. It's part of what many of the people, including the director, but also people across the cleanup program, why they work here is to protect public health from exactly those types of contaminants. In terms of the monitoring, monitoring is required at sites, for example, where waste would be left in place and there's the risk of an off-site release. There are other types of landfills. I'm not certain if you were talking about these, and Wayne is probably better placed than I am, but hazardous waste landfills I know also have monitoring requirements. It just depends on what type of facility you're talking about as to what type of monitoring requirements apply.
Thank you so much, Grant. Wayne, was there something you'd like to add, please?
Yeah, I just wanted to thank her for the comment too, and provide some additional information about hazardous waste landfills. Hazardous waste landfills are required to sample their leachate on a frequent basis and then send those reports to DTSC, and we look at those samples. So it is something that we look at on an ongoing basis.
Thank you so much, Wayne. We have 2 more questions here, and their hands raised. We're going to take that, and 1 additional comment. I am monitoring time, so we're going to take these last 2 questions, and we will go ahead and move on after the comment as well. So Robert Hoffman, if you could please unmute yourself and state your question.
Hi, thanks. I submitted a question in the Q&A about could we get a copy of the transcript or a copy of the Zoom link? And the response was it would be 2 weeks. And we got some very, useful, important information tonight that is relevant to commenting on the emergency rules. So my request is that you make a copy of the transcript or a copy of the Zoom YouTube available to us this week by the end of the week so that we can take it into account in submitting our comments to OAL. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Robert. And we have Yvonne Martinez-Watson. Miss Martinez-Watson, if you could please unmute yourself and go ahead and ask your question.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Thank you. I just wanted to add on to what I just heard right now. Could you please make copies of a transcript, actual written transcript available for people who may be hearing impaired, and so that they don't have to go through the entire presentation again just to hear the part they're looking for. And also, because there's such a short turnaround about this, we need to be careful that we're addressing the needs of all participants, both with vision and hearing impairments and any other needs, which is why I asked about the chat, because the chat box right now, you cannot copy and paste anything out of the chat box. I'd also like to just make a comment real quick in regards to the Exide lead battery plant, recycling battery plant. It doesn't take 40 years for lead to start having an adverse effect on people's health. There are already numerous people in the most of the communities of color surrounding the Exide plant in East Los Angeles who are already experiencing very severe adverse health effects from lead contamination. And the DTSC may think they're doing a great job of speedily addressing it. I have to say that my experience with the community is that it hasn't been fast enough, and that every day that is delayed, we risk more families, especially very young children, pregnant women, and the elderly being exposed to these toxins in their soil. That is completely not the fault of the community, but of the business that operated for so many years with a temporary permit. So I just wanted to put that out there. And if anybody out there is interested in learning more, I would highly recommend they consult with East Yard Communities for Environmental Justice. Thank you.
Thank you, Yvonne. And I believe, Brent, you have a response.
Yeah, no, I think that's also a critical bit of information. And I apologize for not referencing the resources that are available to people in communities right now who have been affected by lead. There are county health departments that have programs devoted to assisting people who have been exposed to lead and who are lead poisoned. We work with the LA County Department of Public Health regularly on the Exide lead cleanup. We work with them in many different ways, including on providing them with information whenever we get word that somebody could be impacted by lead. So very critical that if people have concerns about their health, they contact the county health department and get assistance and information regarding lead poisoning.
Thank you so very much. We do have one last comment. I do want to thank also both Brian and Megan. We have received your information in the Q&A, so we will be getting back to you. The last comment is rather extensive. Grant, it is specifically addressed to you again by the Zeneca, about the Zeneca site. And it has a lot of discussion about GW's contamination of Stagg Marsh and adjacent properties and concerns that are being raised and have been shared via the CAG. And I know you've spoken about this site quite a bit this evening. And if there's any additional reassurances and or contacts here with DTSC staff you'd like to give to Ms. Carolyn Graves?
Yeah, I would, again, thank you for raising the issues. We do meet with the CAD regularly, and where there are instances of either questions or concerns regarding an aspect of the cleanups that have already occurred, we do our best to try and answer the questions. If we haven't answered the questions, I apologize. We need to do better in the future. Since we do meet with you regularly, I would suggest that, we go through what the questions are then. Of course, we've tried to do a FAQ of rolling questions that we've already answered. So, we can use what we've produced in the past, but also augment it as needed to answer any additional questions.
Thank you so much, Grant. And at this time, I do want to remind anyone, again, for all your questions and all your comments tonight. We do want to thank you for that. I believe we've been able to get through everyone who had a question or who put in a text in the Q&A. I just want to verify again with Brittany, if we did receive any comments on our Spanish line, we definitely want to make sure we address those before we move on this evening. And we do not have those. So for our metal shredders presentation, again, if you need additional information, the contact is mswstakeholders@dtsc.ca.gov. That's mswstakeholders@dtsc.ca.gov. At this time, I'd like to turn the meeting back over to our Acting Deputy Director and Chief of DTSC's Office of Environmental Equity, Patrice Bowen. Patrice?
Thank you so much, Michelle. And thank you all so very much for your thoughtful questions and comments. As Dr. Meredith, Grant Cope, and Wayne Lorenzen shared with you, your feedback is very important to us. And so we would invite you to make contact with us following tonight's meeting. Please reach out to us through our DTSC website at www.dtsc.ca.gov/public forums, PLUBFORUMS. We would love very much to hear from you. Now, you can also reach us through another box that we have available to you with your suggestions. This is via our email at our DTSC public participation e-box at public, PUBLIC, participation, PARTICIPATION at dtsc.ca.gov. Again, as we've shared earlier, for media questions or inquiries, please contact Barbara Zumwalt in our DTSC Office of Communications at Barbara, BARA, .ZUMWALT at dtsc.ca.gov. We hope that you will continue to join us at the table for future quarterly public forums. We plan to have our next meeting in November. At that time, we'll send out a meeting announcement or save the date so that you'll know in advance. And we will certainly look forward to having you join us at our November meeting. Now, to ensure that we have your contact information, we're going to invite you to join our Constant Contacts e-list. If you would please subscribe at www.dtsc.gov/DTSC/public, PUBLIC-meeting, MEETINGS. We would also like to hear from you tonight regarding your comments. We'd love to learn if you have any suggestions or agenda topics that we can include for our future quarterly public meetings. And so to do that, we would encourage you to complete our post-meeting survey to share your ideas and your comments. We would very much like to hear from you. Slide 27, please. Before we conclude, I'd like to invite our director, Dr. Meredith Williams, to the table to share her closing remarks. Dr. Williams?
My apologies for the delay. Thank you all for participating. The questions were very thoughtful and really reflect just how much time and energy you invest into understanding the issues that we're bringing to these discussions. We appreciate that. We appreciate all of the information you shared with us. We will be following up in those cases that we said we're going to be following up. And as always, we really welcome information about topics that you would like to see on these agendas. So feel free to share that information with us. As I close, there was a question we didn't get to, which was a request for an update on our fire response. And I do want to take a moment just to acknowledge the folks who are being impacted by the fires throughout the state. Our staff are, in case you're not aware, we oversee the initial cleanup of sites after the fires. We go out and look for anything hazardous, all the household hazardous waste, and make sure that's removed so that the whole debris cleanup can happen. And thus far this season, we've been mission tasked to go do that in 8 different places, for 8 different counties. So it's on top of everything else that we're dealing with COVID, the wildfires are very much front and center in the minds of us here at DTSC. And yet we persist. We continue to do the work, all of us, whether we're working on fire, on safer consumer products, on these critical cleanup sites we discussed today, on metal shredders and permitting. We will continue to move forward. And I thank you for continuing to challenge us and show up to have these conversation and to listen to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Williams. And thank all of you for being a part of this discussion this evening. We so appreciate you, and we look forward to hearing from you again. So as we close, on behalf of our director, Dr. Meredith Williams, our chief deputy, Francesca Negri, and our entire executive team, thank you again for joining us in this collaborative space. We look forward to hearing from you again. As we close, we ask that you please stay safe and please be well. Good night and have a great evening.